Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wet Talk 8, where WET stands for Water, Environment, Technology. And towards that end, we'll be talking about unleashing the positive power of plants with Intrinsyx Environmental's Galen O'Toole and Renee Murphy. So welcome. It's a very interesting topic, and hope to learn a lot in the next hour and change. So I mentioned this is being put on by Sustainable Silicon Valley. We are a 22-year-old nonprofit think and do tank. We have focus areas of water use and reuse, air quality, local mobility, and an overall aim at promoting leading a prosperous, equitable, and sustainable life in a decarbonized, all-electric Bay Area. Jennifer Thompson's the executive director. I'm the water director and also run the Sustainable Life program. We'll have much more about that in coming weeks because we have our big annual Sustainapalooza event coming up in June. Why are we here? Well, you might have heard there's a lot of climate change going on, and this chart, which is updated, it's a warming stripes chart from the University of Reading, which includes 2021 data now, that you can basically see that once the industrial age started up, the age of fossil fuel, our planet heated up, and it's still going strong. We are committed to try to mitigate that. This is one of the great posters from Rewiring America, which is, we feel, very timely, and subscribe heartily to their Heat Pumps for Peace message. And basically, with the IPCC report coming out just a few days ago, unfortunately, it wasn't as big a news item as it should have been, that it was focused on what we can do about things. And if I was to distill the 17 chapters in a few words, it's we definitely need to get off oil and gas. Fossil fuels are fuels for war and ways to wreck the planet. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's the major source of corruption in our public life, and we need to stop it and build the good. So we need to go all electric in our buildings, in our transportation, in our power generation. I mentioned Sustainapalooza. That is coming up June 22nd and 23rd. It covers a full range of topics about sustainable living in these modern times. Last year, we ranged from utility, local community choice associations, which are really our frontline utilities in the Bay Area, as those programs, water use, urban farming, food, especially making your own chocolate, and really getting involved in finding out about how chocolate is grown and why it's on the front lines of climate change. We'll continue that as well. I mean, we really want to run a gamut on so many different issues within, modern life. This Wet Talk is being recorded and will be part of our YouTube channel, which has a ton of stuff on it these days, including last year's Sustainapalooza sessions, which are still very timely, as well as Waterpalooza, and other wet talks, and our first brown bag event that we had, which really got into details of the mapping, modeling, and cost benefit analysis of smart surfaces and citywide budget calculations. So lot of good stuff on there. Again, it runs the gamut. We wanted to recognize our Wet Talk sponsor, good people at Cargill, and have been very good partner over the years. So a little bit about, excuse me, 1 second here. A little bit about Galen and Renee. They are with both with Intrinsyx Environmental, which spun off from Intrinsyx, a Mountain View-based contractor with NASA, and but Intrinsyx Environmental is really focused on this. Well, John Freeman is, I guess, the chief technical officer in this area, and he spun off Intrinsyx Environmental, really, I guess, and focused on phytoremediation. So Galen is an environmental engineer and project manager at Intrinsyx, with over 6 years in project management experience, and a number of years designing engineered natural treatment systems for environmental remediation and wastewater treatment. He was with Valley Water prior, working on water reuse and those issues at the advanced treatment facility in Alviso. He's been involved in Superfund sites, military sites, which are kind of the same thing in a way, redevelopment projects, oil and gas, stormwater, industrial, municipal wastewater, and surface water. So he's very well poised for what Intrinsyx brings to this particular puzzle as far as soils and making good from areas that really could use it. Renee Murphy is an environmental scientist at Intrinsyx, who has joined recently. She has a lot of native plant knowledge and agronomic background. She's run, I was kidding with her about boots on the ground experience, running nurseries, and now has gotten into super trees, environments using phytotechnologies. So she's been involved in restoration efforts in the Salton Sea and area, and also growing native trees where salinity is a big issue, and looking to improve the survival rate. So she moved up from Southern California. She was at Cal Poly Pomona and USC. So I'm kind of botching these introductions, so I'm going to just turn it over to Renee and Galen to do any corrections and modifications, and then get on with this very interesting program. So
you're doing great, Dennis.
Take it away.
The only thing I would add is that, on the chocolate theme, I actually moonlighted as an experimental confectionery chef for Dick Taylor chocolate while I was in grad school. Dick Taylor's a craft chocolate artisan up in Humboldt County that sources their beans direct from farmers and watches their whole supply chain to make sure it's sustainable and the best quality on the planet.
Yes, it's amazing how cocoa is only grows in a narrow band around the equator, around the world, and very subject to changing climate.
Dennis, I have to jump in here and say Galen had promised to bring me some of this world-class chocolate and still has yet to do it. So
it's the after webinar treat. It's in my briefcase right now.
oh, wow. You hear that, everybody?
Gotta come over to our offices and get it to her.
Yeah.
No.
We may actually get into plant-based chocolate. I mean, obviously, all chocolate's plant-based, but there are kind of even substitutes as far as cocoa beans. But that's for another day. Now let's talk about phytoremediation and endophytes.
So thank you for that introduction, Dennis. I think you hit it all pretty well there. My name is Renee Murphy. I am an environmental scientist for Intrinsyx Environmental. My background is in plant science. I've had a lot of native plant production and restoration experience. I've worked on farms, have had a lot of boots on the ground experience. In my free time, I'm a native plant educator and teach seminars to people who are interested in growing native plants. But honestly, phytoremediation is what brought me to grad school. It inspired me seeing what NASA was doing with plants working in, Martian soil, I guess we call it. And for me, that struck a chord. Being an environmentalist, I wanted to see what plants could do for soil, and that brought me to grad school. And I'm super excited to be here on the team at Intrinsyx Environmental, where I'm actually getting to practice what inspires me every day here at work. And let me also introduce you to my coworker, Galen O'Toole. He is our head environmental engineer at Intrinsyx. Galen?
Yeah. I started working here about 2 years ago, and since then I've focused a lot on doing design for new phytoremediation installations, surface water treatment, wastewater treatment, brine management, Superfunds, post-industrial sites, you name it. And it's been a really great way to bring together a lot of my prior experience in working with plants, and then also on the engineering side, working with nature-based solutions to solve some long-standing engineering challenges.
Great. And I don't know, have we started up our presentation here? I'm not seeing it on my screen.
I will do so right now.
Awesome.
Wait, is that the right one?
So, yeah.
All right. Wait a minute.
Presenter view.
Yeah.
Hold on. There we go. That one.
All right. So this is Intrinsyx Environmental, and again, Galen and Renee, if you want to go ahead and advance. So Intrinsyx Environmental, we are a leading phytoremediation company. We use a combination of trees, plants, and specialized microbes to clean up toxic sites and contaminated water. We believe in the positive power of plants and want to show all of you some of the really cool ways in which we use this microbiology to clean up environmental contamination. So we're basically combining science with nature. And what makes Intrinsyx Environmental so special is that we offer nature-based solutions for using contaminant-specific microbes. And Galen will get into that in a little bit more detail. But that is really what makes us special in the phytoremediation world. These microbes, they enhance the capability of plants to survive and thrive in challenging environments. So when you're looking at areas where you're dealing with organic chemicals or high salinity soils, these microbes allow these plants to really be able to survive in that system. Dr. John Freeman, as Dennis mentioned, he's our Chief Science Officer. We've collaborated with NASA, USGS, USDA, and of course the EPA, along with Dr. Chris Koyu at Colorado Mesa University. This team has spent the last 10 years developing resilient and adaptable systems to manage these environmental cleanup projects. So next, Galen is going to kind of talk you through a bunch of these really awesome projects and some of the outcomes. And there are some projects too that we have just started working on too as well. So we're really excited, and I'll pass it off to you, Galen.
Cool. Thank you, Renee.
Mm-hmm.
First off, I want everybody who may not be as familiar with Zoom, if you can, try to find your raise hand button. Should be one of the options at the bottom of your screen. But I'd like to know, phytoremediation is really the cleanup of soil and water using plants and trees. And it's a really complex, really ecosystem that we're leveraging to do this work, cleaning up from the legacy of the industrial age. And who here has done gardening before, or gardens regularly, has a garden? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you have. And think of when you dig into a good garden bed, and you with your hands, and you pull up a handful of healthy soil. It has structure to it. It's dark in color. It's rich in carbon. It has little chunks of soil clinging to each of the roots if you're pulling out a weed or transplanting something. And a lot of the sites that phytoremediation is designed for have soil that doesn't at all look like that. It might be powdery, compacted. It's not dead, but it's close to it. And one of the keys to phytoremediation is getting that soil back alive again. And we do that using trees and plants and grasses that have deep roots that send down deep into the soil and bring with them all of these benefits: aeration, water, nutrients. It's really a sunlight-driven process. It takes photosynthesis and makes sugars and organic acids and passes those off strategically to the soil ecosystem, fungi and microbes, bacteria, archaea. And by revitalizing the soil, we can greatly enhance the cleanup of that soil and groundwater that's below it or within it. So many of these sites are contaminated, and it's hard for things to grow, as I mentioned before. And so to help get the trees and plants established in the first place, we use these specialized microbes that come in that are residents of the microbiome of trees and plants. And these contaminant-specific microbes, called endophytes, allow the trees, grasses, and plants to resist and degrade the contaminants that may be on site, better handle the impacted soil, potentially salts, drought conditions of these challenging environments. So our contaminant-specific bacteria come from the University of Washington. Dr. Sharon Doty has been working on this for the last 3 decades, characterizing and isolating these microbes from contaminated sites and challenging environments around the Pacific Northwest and now around the world as well. And so ours will provide a bunch of benefits to their hosts. Tolerance to drought and salt, fast growth, and addressing contaminants such as chlorinated solvents, petroleum hydrocarbons, explosives, PCBs, and more. We use a combination of very fast-growing, high water use trees, such as hybrid poplars and willows, because these allow us to treat more groundwater in groundwater situations, and they're very adaptable to different climates. They can work pretty much everywhere. Also, we frequently co-plant with native plants, and the willows are really good because there's native willows in pretty much every part of the country. So if we're going to use willows with the hybrid poplars, we always use a local native variety that's sourced locally and adapted to that climate. My schooling at Humboldt State University really focused on water and wastewater treatment, both from the traditional standpoint, as you see here, as well as nature-based solutions. And my previous work with Valley Water was also focused on water reuse and what to do with the concentrated brine that comes out of that. And, you know, water reuse and wastewater treatment is very industry intensive. It's very, requires a lot of energy, requires a lot of concrete, and yet there are still great opportunities to implement systems such as this one up in Martinez at the sanitary district that leverage the power of plants and their associated microbes to clean up wastewater. This is in a lagoon at the outfall where our collaborator EcoLake Solutions has implemented these floating islands that have pretty much reduced or eliminated the algae blooms that this lagoon saw prior. And so the plants put their roots deep into the water, they provide a matrix for beneficial bacteria, and they provide organic sugars, and there's also some limited solar powered aeration under these islands to help move water and add air to the aquatic environment. I've mentioned a couple of times the Valley Water work I did with Valley Water with reuse, and one of those is ongoing. It's a brine pilot using the same floating wetlands as are implemented in Martinez. But this one is designed to remove metals and nutrients from the concentrated wastewater that comes from water reuse. So this is at the Silicon Valley Advanced Water Purification Center, and it is a test bed for the water reuse projects that are planned by Valley Water, including the one going in at Palo Alto and others that are planned for the near future along the bay. So so in this pilot, we're testing several different options, focusing in one on very high biomass plants and another on the native plants, native salt marsh and brackish marsh plants. And we're noticing that the fundamental engineering really takes a big role, but the plants that are already adapted to brackish marsh are doing the best in providing the most treatment. And we're not just looking at brine management from the water reuse. You know, this is a picture of salt ponds. I'm not sure if these are Cargill salt ponds, but they look very similar. And evaporation is one of the key, tools for brine management, but it takes a ton of space, and in a lot of places that space is just not available. So what are the alternatives? And in the San Joaquin Valley, there are over 500,000 acres of fallow agricultural land from over a century of salinizing the soil and the shallow groundwater. And we're working right now with Westlands Water District to come up with a system that will remove salt from soil and provide an agricultural option, a growing option for using a brine from brackish groundwater desalination. So the project is to take shallow brackish groundwater, desalinate it with RO, and then take the brine and use that brine actually to grow crops. Instead of treating it as a waste product, we're treating it as another resource to grow salt-rich and nutrient-rich crops as feed additives, and really seeing those minerals in that water as a resource rather than just something to get rid of. Now, a lot of our work well, let me take a step back. So again, maybe I'll ask you to find that raise hand button, but think about, your drive to work, your drive, near your home, and think about any time you've seen one of these sites. They're all over the place, chain link fence, posted signs, vacant lot, a brown field, an abandoned industrial site. They're everywhere, and sometimes they're abandoned because they're contaminated and nobody has the money or the will to clean them up. And that is just the sort of place that is, appropriate, an opportunity for this nature-based technology that can use trees to clean up these sites in a lot less time than you might think. One of our first installations was a collaboration with NASA and EPA at the Ames Research Center here at Moffett Field. And this is addressing the chlorinated solvents plume from the MEW Superfunds site. So this is our own local Silicon Valley legacy of tech manufacturing right here at Moffett Field. And in the shallow groundwater, moving in towards the bay, are these chlorinated solvents. And these trees were put in about 6-7 years ago. They're now 50 feet tall plus. And from the second year after planting, they grew very quickly and produced results in the groundwater. At the up gradient side and down gradient side of this tree stand behind, you can't see, but the little tiny figure there is Dr. John Freeman, our Chief Science Officer. And when we measured the up gradient well, it was not extremely high, but pretty high levels of TCE, about 300 parts per billion. And in the down gradient well, there was non-detect. So a combination of the trees plus the endophytes the microbes that we inoculated into the microbiome of these trees really cleaned up the groundwater underneath the plot. And the microbes that we use from Dr. Sharon Doty at University of Washington, this one in particular is called PDN3, and its primary preferred food source are chlorinated solvents. Even over other carbon sources, it will choose chlorinated solvents such as TCE, PCE, DCE, even vinyl chloride to metabolize those and produce nothing more than CO2 and chloride, 1/2 of table salt. And the real benefit of that is that all of the chlorinated solvents that are taken up into the trees through the roots with the groundwater that they're pulling are degraded. They don't accumulate in the trees. We measured with Dr. Joel Birkin at University of Missouri Science and Technology. We measured the concentrations in the trees, and the inoculated trees had very low, and the uninoculated trees had levels about the same or a little higher than the groundwater. So there's some accumulation, but about 3 orders of magnitude less in the inoculated trees with the endophytes. This site, let me see. So this site used to be a former fuel station in the Central Valley. Diesel and gasoline, and for a long time, thousands, I think even hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel leaked out of storage tanks and into the groundwater. And this is a problem that's occurred all across the country, underground storage tank leaking. And there's even a whole division of our state water board that's devoted to underground storage tank cleanup. So all that fuel is sitting, working its way into the groundwater and floating on top of the water table. And they had a traditional soil vapor extraction and pump and treat system for decades here that cost a lot of money to run and constantly fouled up. And so they tried a phytoremediation plot prior to our involvement. They planted a bunch of trees, and most of them died. Or were showing severe signs of health impairment from all of the fuel that was in the soil and off-gassing from that fuel floating on top of the water table. And this is a common legacy of phytoremediation across the country, is that the place where you want the trees to thrive and do a really good job is the place where the contaminants are, but that's also the place where the trees won't do as well, and they'll die, or they'll become very stressed and prone to disease and pests and whatnot. So we came in to that original plantation and inoculated with our PD1 endophyte that protects trees from phytotoxicity and has been shown to degrade petroleum compounds, aromatic compounds in bench scale tests. And the results were remarkable. You can see on the right-hand side of this photo, we have a sort of broken line of trees that are a lot smaller than the left-hand line. Those are the uninoculated trees, and on the left-hand side, the row of larger, healthier trees was inoculated with these PD1 microbes. And this remarkable effect, allowed the site managers to want to go forward and plant the entire site with trees. And so in phase 2, we used some salt and boron tolerant poplars, because the shallow groundwater was also, this is in San Joaquin Valley, it's brackish. And so our approach of using the right tree for the right job, in this case, required these salt tolerant trees and microbes to be installed. And they took off and started growing very well. And within just 2 years, they were outperforming the soil vapor extraction and pump and treat systems. And now, in 2018, the state water board signed off on eliminating the soil vapor extraction and pump and treat systems because the trees were doing a 10 times better job by themselves. And so there's no reason to continue that high energy, high maintenance system. And the end result is that now we have a green space in this community that used to be a barren lot with an industrial, fenced area in the middle of it for the treatment systems. And the client is saving over $1 million a year in deferred maintenance costs.
Hey, Galen, I just wanted to jump in here really quick.
Please.
I happened to be out on this site yesterday, And it's really quite amazing to see these trees to be 10, 15 feet tall at this point, and what a difference is made in the way that the community has looked, because there are residential communities all around this area. But I did decide last night to start an Instagram account for Intrinsyx Environmental where I could go and post pictures like this. So if you are into Instagram and want to follow Intrinsyx Environmental, I'm going to post some before and after pictures today of this site, because I think it's just fascinating to see the change in such a short time period.
Cool, thank you. And I won't spend as much time on this site, but it's a very similar story. This is another oil and gas transfer station. This one's in Corpus Christi, Texas. You can see on the left, initial planting in 2018. The lot was pretty much barren with just a few weeds being able to grow here and there. And we planted with a combination of a deep-rooted grass, buffalo grass, native to the west, shortgrass prairie, and these hybrid poplar trees. And we inoculated both with our PD1 endophytes. And they both took hold very well. And you can see just 2 years later, the site is green. And the end result is that the groundwater wells in the middle of the plot and in the down gradient side have dropped the concentrations of benzene in this case from about 50 parts per billion down to 5. So down to the regulatory level, you know, an order of magnitude lower within 2 years. But, you know, yeah. And Renee Murphy is going to take over on this one. I am so used to giving these presentations by myself. I forget that I have.
No, you're welcome if you want to talk about functional.
No. I'll just say one thing about this before I hand it off to Renee.
All right, go for it. Go for it.
Which is that a lot of our work is not just on contaminated sites that are brownfields, and we go in and we plant a bunch of trees. These trees can also be worked into redevelopment efforts, building parks, building office parks, residential neighborhoods, and they can continue to provide the benefits of cleanup integrated into a urban landscape without having to, you know, wait for 100% cleanup before you start redeveloping unused land. So Renee, take it away.
So go ahead and advance my slide, Galen.
Sorry.
So here is a great example of that at Playa Vista. This was an area that was dealing with TCE and brackish groundwater. Here, these trees are actually being watered with high TDS recycled water, but you see how they were able to redevelop the area, still incorporating that phytoremediation quality to the property, and ultimately will beautify the landscaping. So it's a win-win for everybody here. Here is another example of the Playa Vista. This is 3 years later after planting. And this is actually for a Fortune 100 tech company that has to, Galen tells me I'm not allowed to tell anybody where this company is. But you can see how quickly the trees are growing and the landscaping is completely functional. Yet it's doing its job and working on cleaning that groundwater. So I can't lie when I'm going to tell you that my favorite part about working for Intrinsyx Environmental is how I can get my hands in reforestation and ecological restoration. You know, this is an exciting division of where our company is moving. We're currently working on some reforestation projects, areas that have suffered the forest burn sites, and they've been difficult to reestablish because of the compounds that were released during the fire. So this is a great opportunity for us to come in with restoring a native habitat, still treating the plants with the endophytes, because what that is allowing the plants to do is to really be able to establish. And that is a difficulty. When I was working in restoration, the clients would say that, you know, they needed to have a certain level of survival rate and establishment of their plants. And sometimes they were going back in for, not sometimes, all the time, going back in for a second or third planting. So we're hoping that the endophytes can really eliminate this need to have to go back in and continually replant, if we can just get them started from the get-go, making them as strong and resilient as we can right away. You know, we are always dealing with drought and climate change here in California. This is something that we just can't avoid. So it's very important how we manage that land, and being able to bring native habitat into areas where, especially if the land has been deemed unusable or no longer profitable, if we can develop these systems to restore the land and ensure the survival of the trees, we're going to be able to encourage habitat biodiversity. And with all the development that's going on, you know, we've created islands, really, of which, you know, our native plant and animal, or excuse me, our animal species have nowhere to go. They're just bouncing from island to island. This is a big issue. So the more we can go in and restore these areas, I feel like that's just such an important part of our future. We're allowing nature to basically heal, but with the help of our science.
I also want to add really briefly that we're working with a group in Canada, PRSI, that is developing a seed ball. So a little ball with native seeds, nutrients, biochar, and inoculated with endophytes that are designed to be dropped from drones for restoration efforts. And so we're trying to, you know, use the furthest advance of technology, but in a way that allows us to regenerate the natural ecosystems, which in the end are going to be the strongest movers and heaviest lifters of any cleanup or climate mitigation efforts.
I love that.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm ready. So this is very interesting, and I didn't want to show this map to make anybody nervous or scare them about the Silicon Valley, but these little points of color, you can see this on EnviroStore, their website. You can look at your area and plug in your zip code and see basically all of the areas that are infected by contamination, and this is Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley by no means is unique. This situation exists all over the United States. You know, I haven't quite yet developed my calluses for working with environmental cleanup. Learning about this immense scope of these cleanup issues, it really weighs heavy on my heart. And, you know, much of what you see here on this map is from legacy manufacturing from the tech industry of the past. But I wanted to show you this map because I wanted to inspire all of you to get to know what's happening in your community. Seek answers from your local government, pressure them to address these restoration efforts. Hold your companies responsible for the waste, and buy from companies that are environmentally responsible, even if it costs a little bit more. You can vote with your dollars. And I think, you know, we assume because something's manufactured, say in China, that somehow that is eliminating these environmental problems. It really just makes it worse because they don't have any regulatory efforts in other countries. So we've seen people come to us that are seeking funding through grants and initiatives to make their community a better, safer place to live. There's environmental funding available more now ever. And there are these nature-based solutions, and we really can work together to make these really awesome changes one by one together. And that's what being part of Intrinsyx Environmental has meant to me, is really being able to be hands-on in these efforts. But these efforts have all been a part of our very large partnership network. On the next slide, Galen, these are just a few of the partners. Do you want to, I'm sorry, go, yeah, these are just a few of the partners that we work with, but we're really lucky to have them and their support. You know, each one of them have contributed to the projects we've been able to do. If you want to go back to the slide, I can address that. So I'll tell you, my favorite question we get from clients is, why can't we just plant the trees? And it's just not as simple as that. As Galen has addressed before, that the trees really just can't survive in the condition that we're trying to get them to establish. It's with the combination of the endophytes, the special selection of the species, the integrated design process, and then over time, we're maintaining the health and the effectiveness of the program and adjusting it as necessary. So it really is a system that works together. It's not just the trees and it's not just the endophytes. It really is everything just working together. So Galen, can you tell us how can people contact us, and can you give people some calls to action?
Yeah. Easiest way is to reach out to us directly. Email works great, or dropping us a line via, or contact us on our website, intrinsyxenvironmental.com. But we've also been working with, you know, Renee mentioned just a couple minutes ago about funding opportunities, and we've been working closely with the Forest Service and urban forestry divisions of the Forest Service to leverage state funding for urban forestry in some of these cleanup efforts that have multiple benefits. You know, providing urban canopy, they're reducing heat island effect, they're reducing electricity needs for air conditioning, they're providing green space for inhabitants, and they can provide cleanup at the same time. And in that same vein, we have partnered with Arbor Day Foundation nationwide and globally to offer free assessment of any site if you're in a tree city, you know, an Arbor Day tree city such as Mountain View. And Santa Cruz has taken us up on this and had us evaluate a site that used to be a firing range down there that they're restoring. And, you know, any site that you see in your community that you think could have some action on it, please go to the website at arborday.org/phyto to get a free assessment, or contact your local officials to get a free assessment for that. Also in California, the Department of Toxic Substance Control, DTSC, is managing over $200 million for environmental cleanup and site assessment, and also just community-wide assessment for brownfield redevelopment for community benefit. And that's through the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant, or ECRG opportunity. And so you can look that up directly or contact us for more information, but that can be a really important funding source to address some of these brownfields that you might have in your community, or just assess, you know, which areas would be most valuable to redevelop or address that you may not be aware of.
Absolutely. So Galen, I don't know if you noticed, there's quite a few questions in the chat, and I'm going to give most of them to you, except let me answer a couple of them. Yes.
Actually, Renee, if I can
Want to
take
Q&A?
over, I do want to give emphasis to the Q&A people who,
Yes.
because that's always the best way to start, and then we'll go back to the chat as well. So if we can, so Jenny Ta has a question about the kind of the end life. What happens to the trees used in phytoremediation once they reach the end of their lifespan?
That's a great question, and one that we get all the time. There are a bunch of different uses for them depending on the application. So trees that grow larger can be used for lumber or other purposes. Poplar is a hardwood and has value as a lumber species, or other biomass. We also are working with companies to create biochar from our end of life trees, and that is a really good way to sequester carbon long term. Biochar carbon lasts in the ground for a really long time and offers carbon sequestration benefits for generations. But I think the other part of that question that we typically get is, are these trees, do they hold a high level of contaminants? Does this have to be considered hazardous waste? And we test our trees before disposal, and typically, especially for organic and chlorinated organic compounds, the endophytes are degrading them to the point where that waste is non-toxic. Most of the cuttings, for instance, from our Playa Vista site, we've mulched and composted and tested that mulch and found non-detect for the contaminants that the trees are pulling up from the groundwater.
Yeah, that was also one of the questions over in the chat. So I'm glad you got to that, that the toxicity is usually degraded by the endophytes.
Yes, and along the same line, Eddie Van Giesen has a question about native trees. Now, there was mention of the poplars, and
Yeah.
I'm assuming, so there is a question as far as, say, tree and plant species, are some better than others? I mean, poplars are known
Yeah.
for their big tap roots and water seeking, but he asked if about native trees, that can serve the same purpose as poplars. And I wonder if you could discuss the, the kind of the tree species or plant species that, might be more favorable to your approach.
Yeah.
I have to put my 2 cents in on this one
Sure.
before you go
for
get
it first, but I have.
Yeah, oh, of course. I'm going to let you finish this one off, but I'll tell you, this is probably the one thing I squawk about every day in the office is, why can't we just use native everything? Native trees especially are drought tolerant, don't utilize a lot of water. If we're trying to get a tree to go down into the groundwater and filter water, what we really want is a tree that is a thirsty tree and will bring water up into this system in high quantity. So there are certain times where we need to use certain trees based on their characteristics, and sometimes those aren't natives, but I'll let you get real technical with that.
No, this is a great topic, and one that we talk about
argue all the time.
More frequently. And the upshot is that for groundwater remediation, what we want is the tree that will transpire the most amount of water and draw up and clean as much water as possible. And the hybrid poplars that we use are sterile and cottonless and non-invasive. They cannot propagate or cross-pollinate into the environment whatsoever. And they transpire about 100 times more water than any of the natives, even your native cottonwoods or native eastern poplar. And so for that purpose, we use hybrid poplars. But the other reason we use hybrid poplars are as a transition species. Because they grow so fast and establish so quickly, they can set the stage for native species. And some of our collaborators in the Northern Research Station at the Forest Service have been using hybrid poplars in the Northeast, specifically in restoration efforts, because they'll shade out invasive trees and establish very quickly. And then because they have a short lifespan, they'll transition out of the system and make way for the natives, which can grow fine in their understory and then take over as they fail. And so they have a really useful purpose. But beyond that, when we tackle, say, soil remediation as a primary focus, we use mostly native plants because the natives are going to be best equipped to send their roots deep and wide into the soil in that particular environment. I hope that answers it pretty well.
Yeah, well, I would call that the fit for purpose question. You know, as far as the right tool for the right job or the right species for the right job. You know, as well. The Nathan White asked about the timeline from planting of a brownfield to usable public green space.
So that's so site specific that, you know, there's no easy, quick answer, of course. But depending on the installation efforts, that could be either immediate, you know, shortly after planting, to anywhere from immediate to, you know, 3 to 5 years, depending on the site. So a lot of sites, you know, you could put in a couple feet of topsoil, remove the contaminants from immediate human or environmental exposure, and then the trees can work through that couple feet of protective top layer and continue to remediate even while you're actively redeveloping the site as a park or a green space or some other redevelopment effort. Some of our, as I mentioned before, some of our sites have seen, you know, dramatic improvements in just a couple of years after planting.
Yeah, so I think the key thing is the measurements in years for sure. You know, even fast growing is, you know, not an immediate thing. There's a question from Netta Shastari about asking about what happens to the contaminants after planting. You know, if you can, how do they break down and become benign? If you can, that kind of transformation process. I guess what goes on at the root level or the endophyte level. I guess those are two different levels, but
yeah, and it happens at both levels. So it really depends on the type of contaminant we're talking about. You know, let's say PCBs, for instance. PCBs are very hydrophobic. They don't dissolve in water and they're not going to be taken up into the roots easily, but they will be drawn to the root surfaces. And the root surface is really just a hotbed for microbial activity. And the PCB degrading strains that we use are associated with the roots and the rhizosphere or the soil ecosystem in the ground underneath the trees. And so for that one, the microbes and at the root surface, it's this sea of activity where fungi and bacteria are interacting with the tree and plant roots in a, you know, carefully balanced and always in flux relationship, and they're trading nutrients and elements and micronutrients back and forth, water, air, oxygen, constantly, and adapting to the needs. And so the trees and fungi will both be architects of this system by releasing into the soil different organic acids and different compounds to promote certain types of bacteria that will give them what they need. And so the bacteria are really the workhorses that are responding to the fungi and the trees in this system. And so they will be degrading in the soil much faster. For instance, on the Dos Palos site, that was the Central Valley fuel station site that I mentioned earlier. And I'd love to actually advance slides here.
Yeah, you can share screen again.
Is it not sharing at the moment?
Right, it's you could just grab the screen again.
Okay, no. So let me, sorry about flipping through quickly.
And also just a mention of how plumes move.
Yeah,
They're not a static thing in the soil.
the groundwater moves, and so do the contaminants. But on the Dos Palos site, we measured CO2 flux, so how much CO2 is being generated from the soil as a result of the degradation of petroleum compounds as a result of this enhanced soil ecosystem activity. And so the native microbiota in the soil will adapt to contaminants. And if they have the support of trees and plants providing, essentially the benefits of sunshine underground, they will start working a lot more. And this graph shows gallons per acre normalized to octane that are being degraded on site. The red line shows the effect in the tree planted plot, and the yellow line underneath, or orange, is out of plot, sort of the native background effects of the soil microorganisms degrading petroleum. And so you see that, this is just a year and a half after planting. The whole site, we have already 5 times more degradation happening in the plot than out of the plot. And this map shows in the size of the circle is the amount or the volume of CO2 produced, and the yellow proportion, let me make sure I have this right. Sorry, the green proportion is fossil fuel derived carbon. And so we see, out of plot almost fully yellow circles, and then in plot we have a lot of degradation in the soil of that fossil fuel carbon. So the other place, where these contaminants degrade is inside the trees, and a lot of chlorinated solvents and aromatic hydrocarbons are soluble in water and will be taken up inside the trees, where the microbes will eat them directly for a food source and degrade them. In case of TCE or trichloroethylene, we'll degrade them all the way down to chloride and water and CO2. So full breakdown.
Okay, there's more questions. We actually, I think even more so, we have more questions even than normal, and we used to. So there was mention, and this is from Priyanka Kashwaha. There was a mention of using endophytes in seed balls. Have plant growth promoting bacteria, e.g. nitrogen fixers, been used with native species to remediate a site?
Do you want to tackle that one, Renee? I know the short answer, from the nursery perspective, you want to tackle that one?
Yes, I do need you to repeat the question, though. It's actually
it's a
screenshotting these questions, because I thought this might be nice to address through Instagram as well. All of these questions are fantastic. I just
we'll circulate the chat as well. But there Have plant growth promoting bacteria, like nitrogen fixers, been used with native species to remediate a site? So it's a multi-part question there.
Yeah, I'll tell you, as far as any type of restoration jobs I was directly involved with working at the nursery, um, other than using like mycorrhizae, there was really no thought to anything else other than just to put the plants out there and hope for the best. And that is through my work over at the Salton Sea was the first time we were using endophytes out with the trees to help improve their survival. Phytoremediation and these types of options to help with native restoration is not, I never came into contact with it. It's not really talked about. People don't really know about it. So that is a large part of what brought me to this area, and how I continue to cross promote through societies like California Native Plant Society, is really through the education of how we can improve establishment of native plants with these technologies. Do you have anything to add to that, Galen?
Yeah, I sourced for the Valley Water pilot. I sourced some seeds that were native to the Midwest from a Midwest native plant nursery, and for the legumes that they provided and the pulses, they did provide seed treatment of those with the nodule forming nitrogen fixing bacteria. So I know that a lot of the native plant nurseries, especially, but as far as I know, it's mostly just for legumes
Right.
that typically would have nitrogen fixers. They will seed treat those, inoculate those, so that when they go in the ground, they have the microbes they need to get going well. But that's the only example I know of outside of the endophytes. The endophytes are a new addition by Dr. Sharon Doty and some other key researchers around the world of the last 15 years. There's been a lot of strides on understanding endophytes and their role in tree health and plant health.
Right.
And so there is actually that comes to a question I had about endophytes and some of the original work, I guess, that resulted in the grove of trees in the in between the baseball diamonds and Moffett Field, were I think were endophytes that were isolated in Dr. Doty's lab up at University of Washington, and licensed for that. And obviously, there's a lot of different strains, or I'm not sure, what the cumulative term is for endophytes, but there's a lot of variations, and that kind of. So, is that something that's more basic kind of academic research? And where just different strains, like if there were, for instance, with our continuing drought, for instance, if there were just even tree endophytes that had characteristics for miserly consumption of water, for instance.
So
But that kind of work that's more in the more academic lab. I mean, so I just want to differentiate. Say,
let me take that from
the Doty Lab's work versus like what's going on in Intrinsyx.
Yeah. So Dr. Sharon Doty she works on, in her lab and other labs work on identifying these bacteria from wild populations. And I want to point out that these bacteria are of species that are ubiquitous across North America and the world. So it's not always a species specific issue, it's a strain specific issue. There's so much variation between strains of bacteria of the same species, depending on where they're living, that there'll be the same species that's growing inside of a tree on a Superfund site, and somehow that tree is more healthy than surrounding trees, or there'll be some healthy plants on a Superfund. And so this sort of stuck out in Dr. Sharon mind of like, how is this tree thriving in this really challenging environment? And so she would notice those anomalies and then isolate the bacteria that were doing heavy lifting for protecting that tree in that challenging environment. And so by doing that, she has come up with all these different strains, specific strains of common species that do a whole bunch of different things for trees. And so where Intrinsyx came in, Dr. John Freeman and our collaborator, Dr. Chris Koyu, is they worked on taking those strains that she identified and then figuring out how to apply them in the field, how to match them with the right trees, grasses, and plants to remediate or to provide benefits to agriculture. And so those early R&D efforts spun off into Intrinsyx Environmental and for remediation and environmental restoration, and also Intrinsyx Bio, which is focused on using those similar strains for agricultural benefit. And so the crossover here is that some of these strains protect against drought and low water and salinity and high heat and other environmental stressors, and help plants adapt and mitigate those effects. And some of them provide nitrogen fixing inside the tree, so or the plant or the grass. And so most traditionally, it's thought that most nitrogen fixers were in the ground, creating root nodules. But these endophytes will take nitrogen from the air inside the tree and fix nitrogen right in the stalk or the leaves or the stems. And they do the same thing in agricultural fields with crop plants.
Thanks for mentioning Intrinsyx Bio.
Yeah,
we might have to have a separate thing for them at some point, but that's a sister company within the Intrinsyx biosphere. Just a quick question that was asked about, and I would think this was more of a tree species thing than anything else, but what is the maximum depth that the roots in this instance can extend into the soil? I think this was early on when you were talking about cypress taproots.
Yeah, so poplar roots will go about 35 feet down. But the deepest that we know tree roots will go in search of water is actually from mesquite, which is native to the Southwest. And our very dear mentor and collaborator, Dr. James Landmeyer at USGS, who wrote a very comprehensive book on groundwater remediation or groundwater phytoremediation using trees. And mesquite trees will descend 50 feet into the ground. So they hold the deepest depth. But if the water table is shallower, it's typically thought that the roots will extend 5 feet, 6 feet, maybe a little deeper if there's oxygen in the water, but not a lot deeper than that. They really want to put their roots down to the capillary fringe of the water table, and draw the water from there.
Mm-hmm. The mesquite tree is one of those trees we're looking at right now to see how we can incorporate it more, as it's such a fantastic California native. We're trying to figure out the best applications for that tree in our different systems.
So I think we had described your talk about the promise, potential, practice of endophyte-driven, remediation or whatever. But do you see Do you see a day where, like at a retail nursery, that there would be, say, treatments in this regard? You know, like for instance, in terms of the conditions you just described, you know, in terms of high heat stressors and obviously water, you know, issues as well. I mean, so I wondered if you just wanted to look to a little bit to the future in terms of applications and potential markets.
Well,
I got to hear what are we both thinking
I
the
want
same
to
answer?
say one thing first, based on
Yeah, go for it.
the water use efficiency,
Yeah,
which is a term used by agriculture and forestry researchers, and basically describes how much growth happens, how much biomass is put on per water used. And we recently had some published studies from collaborative work with University of Mississippi State University, sorry, and Heidi Renninger and Adam Palenko. And that showed in poorer soils and more upland environments with lower water, it showed that the poplar trees treated with our mix of endophytes for the purpose of establishment and growth, had 60% higher water use efficiency. So for the same amount of water, they put on 60% more biomass. And the same has been seen also in some of the field trials for agricultural crops. So it definitely helps with water use efficiency. And I'll let Renee take the part of this that is relating to the nurseries and offering of inoculated stock or plants.
sure, absolutely. Currently, there is a lot of interest in government agencies like the USDA in developing potential climate smart commodities. There's actually a big grant being offered right now to help move the industry towards that direction. I definitely think it's something we will see in the future. I think it's something that customers would definitely be encouraged to be purchasing something they felt ultimately was better for the environment. It will take some time, but being in California, I definitely think that's where we're going.
And we like, at least we've been in talks with nurseries on this topic, and
Right.
we like Renee is a big proponent of the combination of native plants for landscaping with these endophytes. So, already native plants are going to be better equipped for, changes in climate and drought and that we're seeing. But combined with the endophytes, it could make a big difference in terms of how much aesthetic value you can get out of your landscaping while using a lot less water.
And the market is ready for it, but it will definitely take nursery owners that have more of a visionary way of looking at things to embrace this. But it's definitely time for this product. In the state of California, it absolutely is time.
Okay, yeah. Well, I volunteer one of our sponsoring organizations, Linkso, in Redwood City, who I know had interest, for instance, in the biochar from Biosource Technology, the company that was out in Silicon Valley, Clean Water. They're on the site doing. They had a biochar process that used that's very interesting. So they're just down the road from them there. But anyway, that'll be a continued. I'd like to make some introductions there because it's quite a. They're quite a progressive nursery have shown a lot of vision and leadership, as well. And by the way, I did want to bring up. I remember actually Sharon Doty and others talking about it's a fascinating subject, the mother tree, and about how trees are connected and they communicate and share resources, and actually the more like drier a climate is or the more adverse conditions, the more they do this. But have you seen in your work this kind of phenomenon as far as trees? Well, I guess you're planting trees, new trees, and but I just wondered about that interconnectedness. For instance, in groves you've planted, if it's too, I don't know if it's too early to have that kind of setup as far as communication between trees or sharing resources and stuff. But
I think it happens very quickly. But if you think of the trees as sharing resources, what the sort of information highway and chemical highway under the ground is going to be made of mycorrhizal and arbuscular fungi. And so they will establish, within, it really depends, but very, very quickly. And we actually inoculate our trees when we put them in. We inoculate the soil with a mix of mycorrhizal fungi that are beneficial and help facilitate this process from the first moment that the tree pulls root out. And
actually, Galen, just a quick question inside the question. Just when you talk about inoculating the trees, you're really talking about, do you have them in a kind of a gel that you're dipping roots in, and then you have these kind of balls in the soil that you put?
So it's different depending on the application, but typically for the poplars and the willows, we plant them as cuttings. So a bare cutting of can be as short as 10 inches or as long as 17 feet. But
I can post some pictures of that to Instagram. It's really quite amazing.
Yeah, that would be great. And
so they go in as bare poles and they just sprout roots and leaves and get going from there. The willows and the poplars. And so for the endophytes, we inoculate usually as a liquid. We soak the bases of the poles or the cuttings in a liquid inoculum, and the endophytes move into the trees and then the tree cuttings and then disperse from there. We can also go in and inoculate existing trees and plants, both through foliar applications and soil applications at the base of the plant or tree. And the endophytes will work their way in from forks in roots and branch buds and any crevice or area that they can find their way into the tree, and then they propagate and they move out and they colonize from there. So I don't think I have the slide showing it, but they've been in the lab and in controlled setting. They've been tagged with fluorescent markers so that they can be seen on a electromicrograph, and they, from inoculating the upper portions, they then quickly move into the roots, and you can see, very high count of these endophytes in the roots shortly after inoculation. But for the soil mycorrhizae, this is more of a pellet or powder-based inoculation that you just put into the soil right where the cutting or the plant is being planted, and they will, as the roots move into that area and the mycorrhizae start getting going, they will colonize the roots and move through the soil that way.
Interesting stuff. One, actually, this is probably a long answer, but it's a quick question, and the kind of a devil's advocate question. Um, this is non-GMO, right? As
Yes.
short a question as I could put, but I mean it
I'll give you a
because
short
I could
answer.
just see somebody thinking, "Oh, this sounds like genetic modification," but it isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, you're actually using this is more nature-based solutions in terms of existing uh, uh, endophytes.
Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll make it a short answer on this one because none of our organisms are GMO. Um, they've all been, even the specialized hybrid poplars that we use that are tolerant to salt were just tested and selected out of hundreds and hundreds of different clones to see which ones did better in a salty environment. And it's the same with the endophytes that Dr. Sharon Doty has identified. She does not do genetic modification. She finds naturally occurring endophytes and isolates the specific strains that are beneficial or more beneficial than the others. And so these are ubiquitous to north plants and trees in North America. The species are, and so the species will fill the same role or the same niche in the microbiome, but it'll provide these added benefits that are specific to the challenges of that environment that we've identified.
So if we're looking for that scary science fiction movie, we'll have to look elsewhere.
I hope so. No, definitely.
I wanted to get to final thoughts. We're hitting 11:30, and I'm sure we can go much longer even, but we'll have to leave it here. But the final thought lightning round.
Well, first off, thanks for everybody for sticking around for the Q&A so long. I see most people are still on, so thank you.
It's a hearty bunch.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm impressed.
Yeah.
And yeah, this will be recorded, and we'll certainly look to, well, for one thing, look to the Instagram page for continued inspiration, and certainly keep our eyes out and actually look to see in the Bay Area. You mentioned that say Mountain View and possibly Santa Cruz were arbor cities. Is that the designation?
Tree Cities USA.
Tree
So
cities.
yeah, please reach out to us directly. Please look at the arborday.org/phyto page.
Yep.
Get a free assessment for a site in your city if you're a tree city. And for funding, please please look into the economic revitalization community grants that are there for the taking for brownfields in our state.
Right.
Yes, I'd like to plug you into our previous wet talk people that I mentioned, the Smart Surfaces Coalition, because they do a lot of city like budget-wide analysis and recommendations. Specific recommendations they've done so far for Baltimore, Philadelphia, and most recently Stockton, and
Cool.
and look to plug into programs, federal and state, programs as well in terms of answering that. How do you pay for this question?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Galen O'Toole, Renee Murphy. It's St. Patrick's Day was last month, but we should have had you then. But thanks so much for playing Wet Talk.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much.
much, Dennis.
Pleasure being here.
All right. Well, take care, and people on tuning in will follow up with a whole bunch of different links, including lithium mining, which was a whole other issue that kind of came up as well, and is in the chat. Anyway, thanks again, and we'll definitely keep plugged into this, the goings on at Intrinsyx.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you very much.
Thank
All
you.
righty, take
Have a
care.
good day.
Bye-bye.